All right. How's everybody doing? There's a piece of tape right here. It says "Do not cross," and it's all caps, which is really aggressive. But then at the end, it has a smiley face. So it's like, "Do not cross, please." Like, if you would consider that. Christian, one of the pastors here, normally introduces me, but today he said, "This is your 8th time. I'm tired of introducing you. You're going to have to just get up there and talk." So I would like to introduce you, today's speaker, me. My name's Lane. If you've never met me before, Brad will be back next week. That's all you really have to think about. Luke chapter 2, that's where we're going to be today. Go ahead and turn there if you have a Bible. If not, it'll be on the screen. We are starting a series today called Finding God, and we're really talking about how to find God in the midst of the chaos of the Christmas season. Because even though today is the beginning of Advent, the Christmas season has started, this is controversial, but to me it starts on November 1st. For some people it starts after, but I'm right. It started November 1st. But the point is, we are in the thick of Christmas season. We had Black Friday, we've been shopping, your Christmas tree is probably up. We are here, and in the chaos of the Christmas season, even though Christmas is about God, it can be easy to miss God in it. And so over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be talking about how to find God in different parts of what comes with the Christmas season. And today we're talking about the routine of Christmas. Because in Christmas, there's a lot of routine. There's a lot of tradition. There's a lot of things that we just do. And sometimes we can go through the motions of Christmas as kind of a means to an end. It's like we're just kind of doing the things that come with the season because that's what we do, because it's the season. And then we get through it, and then in January, we're like, let's clean up everything. Or if you're like my family was, in February, let's clean up everything and move away from the Christmas season. And we miss something in that that's really, really powerful. I know even if you have kids, we have small kids, my wife and I, we have 4 girls, and it's easy to assume that they just know what this is all about. Like we were having Thanksgiving dinner the other night, and we're going around the table talking about, what we're thankful for. And one of them says, she's thankful for Christmas. This is my 5-year-old. I'm like, great. I'm like, what are you thankful for about Christmas? And of course she says, I'm thankful for presents. I'm like, cool, that's great. I'm like, what is Christmas about? Like, what's Christmas about? And she goes, it's where we celebrate Jesus and Santa's birthday. I'm like, not exactly, but kinda, like, yeah, like, yes and no. And I just realized, like, wow, we got some work to do. Like, Jesus and Santa are not exactly on the same level, but to her, it's both of their birthdays, and we're going to throw a party, right? So it can be easy to miss the whole point. And it's like in the traditions of Christmas, it's like we get through all of this, and we realize at some point we have to remind ourselves of what this is all about. And Christmas aside, the routine of life is something that we can easily be caught up in as well. In fact, most of life is routine. Making breakfast, taking your kids to school, going to work, brushing your teeth, checking the mail, working out, mowing the lawn. Like, this is just life. And often, when we're doing those things, it can feel like we just need to get through this so we can get to the thing that we really want to do. But if we miss that, if we miss the routine, we've really kind of missed our life. I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma, and often I would hear people say, like, oh, this place is so boring. Like, nothing ever happens here. I'm like, what do you want to happen? Like, do you want more crime? Like, what is it that you're hoping would happen here? And what they would say is that it's just so predictable. It's the same every day. And you might have heard this, like, life is so predictable. And especially, I felt this tension too when I was younger. It's like, life is so predictable. I want something exciting. But then when I think about how much routine is predictable and how good that is, think about if the routines that you take for granted every day became unpredictable. So tomorrow morning you wake up, you go to turn the water on to brush your teeth, and the water doesn't turn on. You're not going to say, oh, this is so nice, I've wanted some change, right? You go to flip the light on, the light switch, and it doesn't turn on. You're like, yes, I love being in the dark. And if you grew up like me with a little bit of income insecurity, you're like anxious right now because you're like, who didn't pay the light bill? And if you didn't grow up with income insecurity, you don't know what I'm talking about, and you're, good for you. I wonder what that was like. You go to turn your coffee maker on, right? And it doesn't work. You go to start your car, you push the button or turn the key, and it doesn't come on. You don't say, yes, finally, the routine has been broken, right? Those are ridiculous examples just to show that like life is a set of routines, and in that predictability of routine, that is our life. In fact, I love this quote from the book Habits of the Household, which I highly recommend, especially if you have young kids. It kind of helps to shape the culture of your family. Justin Whitmore Early, he says, our routines, he said, moments aggregate and they become memories and traditions. Our routines become who we are. They become the story and culture of our family. So these are not moments. These routines are not moments that we have to get through to our lives. These moments are our lives. So if we bring this back to the Christmas season, there's much tradition and routine that can seem like kind of an interruption to just enjoying the Christmas season, but the routine is the thing. The routine is the season. So who do we have to buy for? Where are we sending cards? Are we sending cards this year? What do we do with these leftovers? I like to think about, Thanksgiving food. It's kind of like eating at Cracker Barrel. It's like it sounds good in theory, and then you realize it's just various piles of mush. And then you're like, what do we do? It's like there's a reason why we only do this once a year. Am I the only one? I don't know. Anyway, some of you are like, blasphemy! You can have our leftovers, okay? You can have them. Cold mashed potatoes. Christmas comes and the tree's up, okay? Kids are out of school, we're at church, we're here, but do we really expect God to show up in it? That's really the question that we're trying to get at today. In the routine of life, in the routine of in the routine of Christmas, is there a genuine expectation that God will do something? And this brings us to a familiar passage in Luke chapter 2. This is the Christmas story. You've probably read it, you've probably heard it. But today we're going to focus in on a different part of it, and we're only going to read a couple of verses in it. And I want you to see this from a different angle. Luke 2, starting in verse 2. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. Verse 3. And everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who he was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. So these are the events that lead up, and that baby, by the way, is Jesus, and Jesus is the whole point of why we're even here, and the whole point of Christmas, and it all started because this guy, Caesar Augustus, I guess had nothing else better to do and said, I shall issue a decree. We shall take a head count, which then made Joseph and Mary, while they were pregnant, to have to leave where they were and go over there and raise their hand and say, we're here, right? Like this was a massive interruption. In fact, later on in this series, we're going to talk about finding God in the interruption. And the Christmas season can bring with it a lot of interruption. As routine as it is, it's also an interruption to our routines. We'll talk about that in the coming weeks. But this was a massive interruption. It was out of their control, right? It was a decree. It's not like they could opt out. And so they had to, in the midst of being very pregnant, completely leave where they were. I was talking to my wife about this yesterday. We've had a lot of kids, 4 kids. She had every one of them. I didn't have any of them. And she was telling me, given her experience, it was hard for me too, but she was the one who actually had the kids. But for her, she was saying that when you're pregnant, you do this thing called nesting, where you get your house ready for the baby to arrive. It's kind of a natural phenomenon. And imagine nesting, and you get like the pack and play from the first century, whatever that looked like, everything ready to go, and then you have to just up and leave because the Caesar guy issued this decree, and you got to go do it. Well, that would have been a massive interruption. And so in the midst of that kind of mundane, this is such an interruption, we don't want to do this, we're going through the motions. While they were there, God moved. They just submitted to the process. It's like we do this every year. It's cumbersome. We knew this was coming, or maybe we didn't know this was coming, but we're here. And in the midst of that, they even saw God work. And so what this tells us, and this is kind of the big kind of idea for today, is that when I'm fully present in the routine, I will see God in it. When I'm fully present, I may not like the routine, I may not enjoy the routine, it may not be something that I even really have a lot of, take a lot of pleasure in, but when I'm fully present in the routine, I will see God in it. Because most of life is routine. Most of the Christmas season is routine. We're often tempted to overlook, skip, or rush the routine. Have you ever been tempted to skip a routine or rush a routine or even take a routine for granted because it's just something that happens every year? When we're not fully present in the routine, we have a tendency to not fully be present in it, or to not experience God in it. Well, I was talking to Rachel, who I mentioned, my wife, she had all the babies, and she was telling me about how when she would when one of our babies was like new, like a new baby, not an old baby, but like a new one, she would have to like leave the church service often. You know, the baby's screaming and crying. We have to go take it out to or take her out to the lobby. And feed the baby, take care of the baby, and it can be very isolating. It's like there's something going on in here that I want to be a part of, but I have to leave and retreat, and it can feel very, very much like I'm alone and I'm not present in what's going on. And she said, if I could speak to my former self from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I would say, God sees you. What you're doing is important. It's important godly work. And even in that interruption, and even in that kind of newly formed different routine that you have, God is with you and God is working in that. But it's often hard to see that. In fact, Ruth Cho Simons, this is from the same book, Habits of the Household. She says, we all face a constant challenge to be present in the moment. Have you ever felt that? Constant challenge to be present in the moment. In fact, the biggest thing that takes us away from being present in the moment is what? I don't have it with me. It's in my pocket, but I don't want to get it out because it's a lot to do. But it's your phone, you know? At any given time, it's easy for our thoughts to be all over the place, thinking about a pending task, mulling over an email we received, or even daydreaming about being somewhere other than where we are. Anybody there right now? Okay, I see that hand. Truly being present in the moment is important, but often elusive. Truly being present in the moment is important, but often elusive. This hit me like a ton of bricks last night. I had to bathe my two youngest daughters. I hate bath time. I don't feel guilty about this. I used to. A lot of parents are like, bath time, oh, it's such a special time. I miss it. You're going to miss this. No, I'm not going to miss it. I hate it. I hate getting splashed with water. I hate getting wet. I hate the fact that it takes them forever. And I know a lot of you that have been through this, you're like, no, there will come a time when you miss it. It ain't happened yet. Because my oldest daughters, they take showers, and it's great because they just do their own thing, and I can not be a part of it. It's awesome. But my two youngest daughters, so last night, I put them in the bath, and they like to take baths in our master bathtub because it's just bigger. So I put them in there, and then I go lay down on my bed, and I'm on my phone, and I'm just like yelling out commands. Get your hair wet. Get it wet. Fully wet. And they're just splashing each other, and there's water all over the place, and I'm like, oh. So I go in there, and we're finally kind of finishing everything up. My 5-year-old gets out of the water, and I have stayed dry this entire time. I'm like, yes, this is great. Still got my Birkenstocks on. Like, I am good. I'm not wet. And she flings her hair, and just this sheet of water just goes all over, just drenches me. And I'm like, oh, I did not want to get wet. And in that moment, I was literally feeling all this like, gosh, why do I have to do this? And then I thought, tomorrow morning, I'm going to stand up, and 3 times I'm going to say, find God's presence in the routine. And I can't even seem to do it right now. And so I was like, wow, this is really hard, because there's nothing more routine than giving your kids a bath. Like, that's pretty much just like, that's life. Like, I chose to have the kids. I got to give them baths. They got to be clean. And in that moment, I still have a hard time with it. And so what I did, and I will admit, I only did this because I was going to preach this today. I was like, okay, where's God in this? And all I can think about is I'm thankful that these kids are still alive. That's where I'm at. Okay, so I hope you're inspired. Brad will be back next week. But Joseph and Mary had no choice, okay? In their situation, they had no choice but to be physically present in the moment, in the routine, in the mundane task. They were there, and God showed up in a massive way. So my question for you is, how can I be present in the routine for God to show up? I think there are 3 ways that we can see God when we're present in the routine. We're going to go through them over the next few minutes. The first one we find, and we're going to find these in Psalms and Proverbs. I think there's a lot of really good wisdom about day-to-day life and routine in the Psalms and in the Proverbs. Psalm 5:3, in the morning, Lord, you hear my voice. In the morning, I lay my requests before you and wait expectantly. So there's this idea that when I wake up and I start my day, I'm speaking to the Lord and with the Lord, and in that, I'm waiting for him to move. I'm waiting for him to show up, and there's an expectation. This is a proactive pursuit of God's presence. So what we see in this is that I will see God in the routine when I expect him to show up. When I expect him to show up. We often get what we're looking for. If we put it into autopilot and have no expectation that this year will be any different than any other, it probably won't be, because we get what we're looking for. Have you ever met someone who is always expecting something bad to happen? Anybody? Usually bad things follow that person, right? Because we get what we're looking for. If you ever met someone who just always expects that everything's going to work out and everything's going to be fine, typically things work out and things are fine because we get what we expect. So like my kids this year are expecting a wonderful Christmas. They're expecting it. They're expecting presents for Christmas. In fact, we went to see Santa the other day over at the Peach Creek Santa thing. And if you ever have done this, you learn that as your kids are telling Santa about what they want for Christmas, they list a bunch of things that they've never bothered to tell you about. Because they just expect that this mythical creature is going to somehow figure it out. And one of our kids wanted to make sure that he was the real Santa, my 5-year-old. And she goes, at the end of it, he goes, do you have any more questions or anything else? And she goes, what's my name? It's like, okay. He was great, though. He goes, if it's on your list, I'll make sure that everything works out. So, but they just have this expectation, right? They just want it. They know that it's going to be good. They have plans and a confident expectation and a joy surrounding it. So my question when I think about the routine of Christmas, when I think about it, do you expect God to show up? Because we can be confident God will show up even in the routine and the mundane times. The second thing we see is from Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. I love this passage. If you don't know it, you should memorize it. It's really good. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, everybody say, in all your ways. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. So what he's talking about here is this idea that trust in the Lord with all your heart. That's like your emotions, the center of your emotions. And lean not on your own understanding. So don't trust even in your own thoughts. So your heart and your mind, your emotions and your will. Trust God kind of with your whole being in all your ways. Day to day, in the routine, in the mundane, in the exciting times, in the boring times, in the traditions of Christmas, and in just kind of the everyday waking up. In all your ways, acknowledge him, submit to him, and he'll make your paths straight. What this tells me is that I will see God in the routine when I trust him, when I trust him. So whatever your plans are for your life or even just your day, in all your ways, trust God and you'll see him lead and guide you. Routine sometimes can feel aimless. You ever felt this way? Going through the motions just every day, just the routine of it all. It's good to have a purpose in your routine. I think part of trusting God is kind of figuring out how does this routine, this thing that I'm doing, how does this lead towards something bigger, some bigger purpose? If you've ever had fitness goals before where you're like, okay, I'm not just going to go through the motions of going to the gym or doing my workout. I'm going to really, really take this seriously. So I'm going to watch some YouTube videos about how to get in shape the way I want to. I'm going to lay out my clothes the night before. I'm going to make my protein shake. I'm going to make my pre-workout. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to use an app. I'm going to do a plan. I mean, I don't do any of this, but I'm sure that there are people who do it. I was talking about this yesterday, and I was using first person, and my wife was like, you do about half of that. Like, you should probably use the second person pronouns. I'm like, okay, yeah, you might know somebody. I will say for me, I work very hard to be 25 pounds overweight. I mean, it's very, very, it's not as easy as it looks, okay? But there's a purpose even to the routine of something like fitness. Giving is another thing. Giving is a routine. It can feel mundane, but there's a purpose behind it. In fact, everything around here, everything at this church happens because somebody gives to make it happen. And it's not like some mysterious person, it's you. In fact, Brad often talks about how a lot of you think that there's this secret 30A billionaire who's just writing checks and funding everything around here. And honestly, I'm happy to do it. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. I'm kidding, I'm not the 30A billionaire. If I were, though, I would never tell you, but there would be signs. My odyssey is a touring, but, not the elite. If only I'd worked harder. Psalm 37, verse 23, the Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in him. Here we're going to see joy. I will see God in the routine when I find joy in him. The one who delights in him, even though he falls, the Lord will pick him up. So the question is, do you find joy in the routine? When you find joy in the routine, you will see God in it. Finding joy in the mundane and routine of life is a cheat code to happiness. Have you ever met someone who just, no matter what the situation, they figure out a way to find joy in it? Like the person who's like, hey, my flight got delayed 6 hours. It was awesome because I met this person. We had the greatest conversation, struck up a friendship, helped them through a hard time. It was great, right? You ever met somebody like that? Or somebody who's like, every time they get a parking spot, God gave them the parking spot, It's like, I prayed, and God gave me the parking spot, and it's wonderful. Or like my kids, they will find joy in the smallest things. I'm leaving the house, right? And they're like, where are you going? I'm like, I'm going to the post office. Can I go? The post office? What's that like? I'm like, it's awful. Come on, let's go. Like they find joy in everything. When we find joy in the routine, in God, we can see God show up. So when we expect God to show up, when we trust in him, when we find joy in him, it can transform a routine into something where we experience God's presence, something much, much deeper. Because when I'm fully present in the routine, I will see God in it. I want to leave you with 3 questions. 3 questions to kind of ponder, to think about over these next few weeks and as we go into the Christmas season about the routine. The first question is this: what routines do I take for granted? What routines do I take for granted? What are the routines that they're so common that you're tempted to just assume that this is just always going to be this way? What routines around the Christmas season? It's like, oh, well, I'm with family. Well, what if you couldn't be with your family? Oh, we're having a meal together as a family. Well, what if for some reason you couldn't have a meal? Like, what are the things that we just take for granted because the Christmas season brings these? I had this very vividly last summer. I broke my foot, stepped off a curb, and broke my 5th metatarsal. This is what being almost 40 looks like, all right? Used to be, I could jump around and do whatever. And then I remember in high school, we had a trampoline in my house. And so 20 years later, I bought my kids a trampoline. I was like, hey, I used to have a trampoline. This will be fun. I almost broke myself on that trampoline. Things are different when you get older. You step off a curb, you break your foot. Because of this, I couldn't put weight on my right foot for 6 weeks. And so every single routine that I had to be shifted. It was interrupted. Just getting up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom 5 times became cumbersome, something that is just standard routine for everybody. I got like one courtesy laugh out of that. Somebody's like, I go 5 times a night, that's me. But we can take for granted the things, especially at the Christmas season. What if we didn't take those things for granted? What would it look like to be fully present and not take it for granted? The second question is, what routines am I tempted to rush? What routines am I tempted to rush? I think about like decorating for Christmas. If you're like me, it's just let's just get this over with, right? We got to get out the lights. We got to put up the tree. Let's just get through this. And yet, there's something to be had in the routine of that. It's like, let's turn on some Christmas music and make some cookies and light some candles and have fun and make this a thing rather than just a task that we have to do. So how can we be fully present and not rush the routine? And then finally, what routines am I tempted to skip? Like, what are the routines that I'm like, oh, let's not even take this for granted or rush through it. Let's just skip this because we don't really need it. What routines are we tempted to skip that are actually pretty meaningful? One of the worst routines you can skip is doing your dishes at night. Don't skip that, because all you're doing is punting that problem into the next morning, right? You wake up the next day, you're like, oh, it's a new day, and yesterday's dishes are still there. Great. So what routines am I tempted to take for granted? What routines am I tempted to rush? And what routines am I tempted to skip? And if I were, to allow these routines to stay and not take them for granted, rush them or skip them? How could I be more fully present in the routine? What I love is that here in about 14 seconds, we're gonna take communion, which is a way of, it's a routine. It's a thing that we do that is routine. We do it once a month, but it is a meaningful routine where we take a moment to be present with God and recognize what he's done for us, that he sent his son to live the life that we couldn't live, a perfect life, to die in our place for our sins so that our sins could be forgiven, so that we could have a relationship with God, so that we could even be here, right? So that we could enjoy the routine, so that we could sit in a service, so that we could hear from God. All of that is because of what we're about to physically celebrate with a routine. And so we could kick this off, this Advent season off, by just being fully present in this very vivid routine that we celebrate once a month and ask God to show up. And in the words of Paul in the New Testament, in 1 Corinthians 10, he says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, so in all the tradition and all the mundane and all the routine, do it all for the glory of God. It would be amazing if as families and as a church and as a community, if we took this on this season, I think we would see a very different holiday season where God would be moving in our lives. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for these people. Thank you for this church. Thank you for Pastor Brad that leads us each week. I pray that you would allow your word to speak to our hearts, that we would be more present, that we would be more fully aware of where you're working, that we wouldn't try to rush it or skip it or take it for granted, but live in it and embrace it. In Jesus' name.